The first video I ever made was a review of a trailer for The Flash. As a longtime DC fan, I'm sure I wasn't the only one being skeptical. Why assume the best when we constantly keep getting let down? So I made a lot of predictions and assumptions based on current trends in Hollywood. After watching what DC hails as the greatest superhero movie ever, and paid off God knows how many people to back that claim, I can say that my initial thoughts were mostly on par with the end product. But there were also some very ballsy risks taken in this movie that stray far from the Hollywood norm. The movie is riddled with problems from cast and relevance concerning the new DCU to relying too heavily on nostalgia. First, let's get into a summary of the plot, and be warned there are major spoilers ahead. We start out seeing Barry help Batman and Wonder Woman stop some robbers. Shortly after, Barry gets some pretty bad news about his dad's case, and in a moment of sadness, he finds out he can time travel. After ignoring Batman's warning about messing with time, he goes back to save his mom, but Dark Flash knocks him out of time, and he lands in 2013. His mom is alive, his dad is free, but after trying to help his past self get powers, he loses his own. Then Zod arrives and they head to Batman for help, but they find Keaton's Batman instead of Ben Affleck. After some convincing, he helps them locate what they think is Superman, but turns out to be Supergirl. She ends up helping Barry get his powers back and they're off to fight Zod. Things start well, but it quickly becomes clear this is an unwinnable battle, no matter how many times the Barrys reverse time. Barry tells 2013 Barry to stop trying, but then Dark Flash shows up, and it turns out he's a version of 2013 Barry who spent his whole life trying to fix things by messing with time. The multiverse starts crashing and we get our obligatory cameos from other past DC heroes. Then 2013 Barry stops Dark Flash from killing Barry and dies in the process, killing Dark Flash as well. Barry goes back and stops his plan to save his mom, but decides to change things to make sure his dad can be proven innocent. Cut to present day and his dad is set free, but then Bruce shows up and it's George Clooney, meaning this isn't exactly Barry's original timeline, and after a short exchange between the two, the movie ends as Barry realizes he didn't completely fix things. Before I get into my thoughts on this movie, one thing I want to address is the perception any criticism of this movie seems to get. It seems like people who don't like it are either labeled haters or Snyder fanboys. Nobody wants The Flash to be good more than Flash fans, and I've been one almost my whole life. He's one of my favorites, if not my favorite hero, and he's the character that got me into superheroes in the first place. I hate that I don't love this movie, and it sucks to have these criticisms as a Flash fan, but I'm also not going to lie and prop it up just out of pure bias. As far as Snyder is concerned, I really enjoyed Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman, but they certainly aren't perfect, and I have my issues with his story, especially when it comes to Justice League. Labeling people as either of those things just because they disliked a movie you liked is idiotic, and it gives studios a free pass on any justified criticism their movie might get.
Don't be stupid.
There's really only one positive takeaway I had from this movie, so I'll start with that. Ben Affleck killed it as Batman, and that just makes it suck even more that he won't be back in the role. He was a great Batman and deserved more from DC than what he got. His limited action scenes in this movie were really fantastic, and seeing him on screen with Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman felt great, even if they made him and Barry weirdly awkward in what I can only assume is an attempt to make Wonder Woman look cool, as if the only way she can be cool is if they're acting like bumbling idiots. It gave us a little taste of what this DC universe could have been. Ben Affleck's Batman felt like he could have really helped Barry along his journey, and it would have been such a heartfelt ending to see him read a letter from his father like he did at the end of Flashpoint. Once that good thing was gone, though, it became clear this movie relies heavily on nostalgia. It is not ashamed to squeeze every ounce it can out of the audience. A lot of people compared this to No Way Home, and while I see the comparison, surprisingly, I actually think No Way Home did it better. The reason I'm surprised is I've always thought DC was better at multiversal stories than Marvel, but The Flash obviously took a lot of liberties with their interpretation of Flashpoint. If you take all the throwback villains and heroes out of No Way Home and replace them with a solo story and new villains, the core story they wanted to tell with Spider-Man would still work. All those additions just made it more fun to watch. When it comes to The Flash, though, in my opinion, if you take out all the nostalgia, it's an even worse movie. I hate saying that because Flash is one of my favorite superheroes, but the nostalgia bait in this movie was absurdly overboard. They admitted to shoving in anyone they could get to agree to be in this movie, and at a certain point, it's just too much. There is a clear difference between nostalgia bait and giving the fans what they want. Movies like No Way Home really play with that line, but in my opinion, that movie stayed on the side of giving the fans what they want, considering that the majority of the movie focused on Tom Holland's Peter Parker. and it only brought in the other heroes near the third act for some fun action scenes. The Flash feels like they wanted to do a movie about Michael Keaton's Batman and needed the Flash to make that happen. It might actually have been better as a Batman movie because then that criticism wouldn't exist. But as it stands, this Flash movie feels like the Flash is the last character anyone gives a fuck about seeing. Apparently, I'm not the only one who sees it that way, because the director's sister, who was a producer on the film, said that all the cameos and nostalgia were the core idea of the film. They went into this film with the goal of putting a ton of nostalgia on screen and wrote Barry into that story, whereas No Way Home went in with a clear goal and story for Tom Holland's Spider-Man, then wrote all the cameos and nostalgia in around him. The simple fact is, if people are being honest, they went to see this because of Michael Keaton and him alone. No Way Home still would have been a successful movie without Andrew and Tobey, because Spider-Man is a big enough character to draw an audience in. People were invested in Tom Holland's Spider-Man and his story. That couldn't be further from the case when it comes to Ezra's Flash. Let's set aside the fact that Ezra is a convicted criminal that got to stay in this movie when there have been people who were completely replaced in movies due to offensive tweets. It was a huge project and it would have been a pain in the ass to reshoot Ezra's part, so I get it from a business perspective. Doesn't change how scummy it feels to sit there and watch a genuinely bad human being impersonate a superhero. Nobody really gave a shit about Ezra's Flash. That character was the worst part of both versions of Justice League, and frankly, Flash's big scene in the Snyder Cut wasn't even that good when you look at the Flash TV show and what it did at the height of its success during the first few seasons. The CGI was just horrible. It's the worst I've seen in a while. Everything looked half done and it clearly needed much more time and money. Apparently, the director actually tried to act like it was intentional by purposely misunderstanding people's issues with it. Fans aren't as stupid as you might think. It's pretty easy to tell when they made an artistic choice with their VFX versus scenes when it's just not done right. The plot itself took its most interesting twist from Flashpoint, and the changes it made were nowhere near as good as the original. I can forgive not being able to do the Aquaman versus Wonder Woman war or the bigger parts of the story due to the actors and budget limitations, even though both characters appeared in cameo roles anyways. I don't like that they were excluded because I've always believed you either do something right or don't do it at all, but I can understand it. The best part of Flashpoint was the revelation that Bruce Wayne died in the alley instead of his parents, which led to Thomas Wayne becoming a much more ruthless version of Batman. It made the ending bittersweet when Barry gave Bruce a letter from his dad, and then the fucking Batman cried. The hell did we get in this movie? Keaton's Batman who was too old and being used as nostalgia bait to bring in older fans. Frankly, they did him a disservice because we understand Gotham is safe, but why in the hell would he just say nah to saving the world from an alien invasion? Retired or not, the world is going to end, and he is fully willing to let it. It's a major downgrade from Affleck's Batman, and that's just the tip of the downgrade iceberg.
The only power I have is that I believe we can do better.
Another big Flashpoint twist was the revelation that Superman's ship crashed in Metropolis, and as a result he'd been captured and held captive for his whole life. When Barry rescues him, he's on the verge of death from never seeing the sun. Now, to me that seemed like a slam dunk. You've got Henry Cavill, who loves playing Superman and would have jumped at the opportunity to be in this movie. Instead, we get a version of that story where Supergirl literally just replaces Superman. They try to justify their decision with the whole past Barry crushing on her thing, and that being part of the motivation for his evil twist, and trust me, I'll address that nonsense later. But it doesn't excuse nonsensically swapping Superman out for Supergirl. She looks nothing like Kara, nor is she written well, so frankly, I didn't care about her character at all during this movie.
I guess I just don't care.
Barry himself was just as annoying as ever in this movie, even more considering we had to deal with two of them now. What I will say is by comparison, 2013 Barry makes present day Barry look good. Present day Barry actually has to have some serious moments just to compensate for 2013 Barry's over-the-top silliness. Still, I have zero idea what DC sees in that actor. At this point, it has to be the fact that Ezra checks off a lot of boxes in their quota chart, because otherwise, Ezra brings nothing to the table. I have major issues with the Flash TV show, but one thing I loved about Grant Gustin's portrayal was his ability to balance Barry's nerdiness with his heroism. He always managed to bring the character back before he drifted off too much into being a nerd, because while comic book Barry is a scientist, he isn't some complete geek with massive social awkwardness like Ezra's version. Ezra was extremely annoying, and I kept hoping they'd pull some Crisis on Infinite Earths twist and have Barry die to save the timeline. But thankfully, Barry survives. And while a lot of people seem sure Ezra's future is only being promised to promote this movie, I have a feeling Gunn might actually keep Ezra. Just a strange world we live in where Henry Cavill got dumped and this moron stays.
That's messed up, man.
Then there's the ending. I'm honestly not even sure how to talk about how stupid it was. George fucking Clooney? Really? The most unpopular Batman? Seeing that nonsense when it could have instead been an emotional reunion with Ben Affleck's Batman just furthers my point about how much of a joke this movie is. They went for the cheap laugh with a heavy dose of nostalgia bait instead of writing a real ending. If this gets a sequel, either Batman doesn't show up, Barry somehow fixes things, or they actually bring in Clooney again. The after credits scene yet again piles on with the jokes. Oh, Aquaman is drunk. He's stumbling and falling into a puddle. Haha, so funny. He's gonna sleep in there. Not sure who found that funny, but it was just dumb. As if DC didn't have enough problems getting people to see Aquaman as a badass, now they go out of their way to shit on him. Anyone who knows Flashpoint knows that Aquaman is no joke in that story, but clearly DC sees him as one in this movie. Did that look like someone who could go toe to toe with Wonder Woman and fight off Flash, Batman, and Cyborg? Nope, just some drunk idiot who happens to be king of Atlantis. Also, it's weird seeing people give them credit for having a tragic ending, as if the original Flashpoint story didn't do it first and in a much better way. Barry can't save the Flashpoint universe in the original either. The difference is he went back and just undid saving his mom. He didn't mess with the timeline again even after learning his lesson like Barry did by saving his dad in this movie. The villains in this movie were a mixed bag. We've already seen a better Zod in Man of Steel. The only fun part was watching him and the other Kryptonians butcher Supergirl and Batman. I have no problems admitting when I'm wrong, and wow, was I wrong about him. I thought Supergirl would make him her bitch and show up Superman. But it turns out this movie actually makes Man of Steel even better because you see just how powerful Zod is. It even helps to justify what Superman had to do in order to stop Zod by showing us what happens when he's not there to kill him. Spoiler alert, the world is fucked without Superman. Zod destroys this ragtag B team of heroes, and it's one of the ballsy decisions I mentioned at the beginning of my review that I actually respect.
Very nice.
The Dark Flash, or whatever the hell they call him, was an absolute joke. Yet again, another scenario where the Flash TV show actually puts this crap to shame. And believe me, considering how bad that show got the last few years, I hate giving it praise, but now it deserves it. I figured they weren't using the term Reverse Flash to avoid comparisons to the show, but anyone who knows Flashpoint knows how important that character is. Eobard Thawne's exclusion is one of the biggest mistakes this movie made. During Flashpoint, Barry spends the whole movie thinking Reverse Flash messed up the timeline, and it's his job to save the day. But when he confronts him, Thawne takes great pleasure in revealing Barry did this to the world by saving his mom. Thawne wasn't the villain here, Barry was. Thawne enjoyed messing with Barry by doing small things like putting the Reverse Flash costume inside Barry's ring. In the Flashpoint story, Barry was the villain in the end. He doesn't remember saving his mom, so when Reverse Flash tells him what he did, he has to deal with that decision causing the end of the world. Whereas this movie actually has Barry himself as a literal dark speedster villain. It gives Barry an out and an external villain, because even though Dark Flash was him, it wasn't the version of him that saved his mom. So instead of having Barry face his own mistakes internally, they give him an external villain to blame. It was just way too on the nose. Basically, we just got a crybaby, pathetic version of Barry who's sad a girl he just met died, and then goes insane trying to save her. What the actual fuck? What moron thought that was a better villain? I just couldn't take Dark Flash seriously, especially knowing what this movie robbed us of. Not being able to take it seriously is a pretty good overall description of my opinions concerning this movie. One thing that captures that perfectly is the ridiculous change to his powers where he actually runs backwards to rewind time. Just feels extremely contrived, silly, and takes away from how cool Barry's time travel moments are in the comics, shows, and animation. The whole time travel mechanic in general was just absurd and over the top, when it's usually done in a much simpler and better way. It really took me out of the moment on account of how stupid it looks. Seeing Barry rewind time like it's a VHS tape really takes the fun out of time travel when the aesthetic usually looks like he's going into hyperspace. Everything just felt like it was cranked up to 1,000 to try and distract from things like Ezra's shitty version of The Flash, the fact that they basically reused Man of Steel's third act, but with god-awful CGI instead of coming up with one of their own, and sticking us with a 70-year-old Batman so they can make sure to milk those sweet, sweet member berries for everything they've got. The villain they create is awful, especially considering what the comics set them up for, and the team of heroes we get is nothing compared to what we should have gotten. I thought the worst thing that could happen to the Flash was Iris saying, "We are the Flash." But DC continues to prove their ultimate superpower is that they can always find a way to make things worse.